Mussolini also used the cult of personality to consolidate his power in Italy. He felt the power that fascism had gained should be his own rather than the actual fascist party. He used many different aspects to ensure that he kept this power. Mussolini's personality was put forward as a man of genius, action and culture. It was told that he had read all 35 volumes of the Italian encyclopedia and a vast amount of European literature. He was presented as a youthful role model to the men of Italy, especially as any references to his age were suppressed. This effectively ensured that Italians thought that he was an extremely talented and intellectual man and respected him. The government also controlled the newspapers and stressed Mussolini's benevolence through phrases like "Mussolini is always right." This slogan was spread across the country, with Mussolini stating, "I often would like to be wrong, but so far it has never happened." The fact that he was quick to claim credit for anything that he did right, and even quicker to blame others for mistakes, made it appear that he could do no wrong. He was portrayed as the saviour of Italy and was shown to have superhuman talents. It was thought that he had saved the country from socialists, corruption, and would transform it into the great country that it had potential for. His light was kept on to show that he had dedication of working up to 20 hours a day. The cult of Il Duce was effective because, although it reflected Mussolini's vanity, it convinced the public that there was no alternative, and because they were repeatedly told, they were convinced that he was a great leader that could rule the country effectively.
Mussolini used a variety of techniques through the media to effectively consolidate his power. Firstly, he took advantage of the importance of newspapers at the time. He was the editor of propagandist newspaper Il Popolo d'Italia. Also, the government-controlled newspapers praised Mussolini's benevolence. And finally, he implemented press censorship in 1924. This method effectively portrayed his cult of personality, gained praise from Churchill and Chamberlain, who expressed compliments such as "a wonderful man working for the greatness of his country." Soon, his working nature spread. It destroyed democracy, increasing his own individual power. Secondly, he used radio as propagandist technique. From 1924, the radio network was run by the state. This method was effective because news bulletins frequently praised him and broadcast his full speeches, so his dedication to saving Italy from economic hardship became well known. Finally, he used the film industry. Commonly, films were preceded by a short newsreel which gave a fascist version of current events. This technique was fairly effective, but the regime was slow to make propaganda feature films, so that is debatable.
The Socialists had a fundamental impact on Mussolini's consolidation of power. Factors such as the murder of Matteotti, squad violence, free trade unions being banned, and the Aventine secession allowed Mussolini to improve his position of power.
Giacomo Matteotti was a very prominent socialist who was very outspoken. In June 1924, he denounced the fascist violence during the election campaigns in the Chamber of Deputies. Just days after this, on the 10th of June 1924, he was abducted in broad daylight and stabbed to death. This murder caused widespread uproar among political enemies and many pro-Mussolini liberals as well. Public opinion also started to turn against him after evidence emerged linking Mussolini to the murder.
The murder of Matteotti did not consolidate his power, in fact it almost did the opposite, but thanks to the Aventine succession, which was when a load of anti-fascist deputies walked out of Parliament, Mussolini banned them from returning, giving the fascists full power over Italy. However, the king refused to complete the dismissal of Mussolini. He thought that his dismissal would strengthen the revolutionary left and could lead to a civil war. He was encouraged in this belief by some right-wing politicians who saw the affair as a chance to strengthen their influence over the weakened MPs, rather than the opportunity to dismiss a fascist leader. Giolotti and Sardinia still supported Mussolini's premiership. They saw no viable alternative to Mussolini.
The Rosselli brothers were two Jewish Italian socialists, and
They were Carlo and Nello, and Carlo was much more of a political radical than Nello. He joined the PSI in 1922 and was imprisoned and exiled in 1926 for distributing anti-fascist propaganda. Carlo and Nello then moved out to France and formed Justice and Liberty, which organized an anti-fascist troop in the Spanish Civil War called the Garibaldi Legion. The Garibaldi Legion managed to beat Italian fascist squadrons in the Spanish Civil War. Unfortunately, their anti-fascist crusade would be cut short when Mussolini had them murdered by French fascists.
To consolidate his power, Mussolini was eager to breach the gap between the Catholic Church and the Italian state, which he did so effectively. Firstly, Mussolini disavowed his earlier clericalism in order to win over the Catholics. He also confirmed that he intended to ban contraception and that the fascist party were opposed to divorce. By doing this, Mussolini was able to show the Catholics that they had nothing to fear from fascism by supporting them in their beliefs. Religious education was also made compulsory in state schools, and Mussolini prepared to answer the Roman question, referring to the uncertainty of the Catholics' role in the Italian state.
As a result of these attempts to gain Catholic support and therefore consolidate his power, the Catholics began to support Mussolini. To start, the Pope withdrew support from the Popular state, so that by 1923 it was dropped from the governing coalition, showing just how effective his attempts towards the Catholics had been. Also, in 1929, the Lateran Agreements were signed, conclusively healing the breach between the Church and the state, and making his success in winning over the Catholics. Overall, Mussolini did consolidate his power effectively in relation to Catholic hostility.
Mussolini consolidated his power effectively using the king. Mussolini had the king on his side, supporting him. As the king chose Mussolini to be prime minister, the Italian people respected him, as they respected the king and his decisions. This was incredibly effective in consolidating his power. However, on the other hand, the king could, if he decided to, dissolve Mussolini's power, so in a way reducing the effectiveness of his consolidation of power slightly.
In Mussolini's talks with the king, he never asked the king for advice showing the independence of Mussolini controlling the country, so he effectively used the king as a puppet for the control of the country. This point is further supported by the fact that Mussolini only told the king what he wanted to hear, keeping him blind, which effectively prevented him from interfering. The king was also distracted from domestic policy, and his main focus was on foreign affairs. This meant Mussolini's power was increased and less restricted. This allowed easy consolidation of power.
Unfortunately, Mussolini had the economic ability of today's Italian politicians, leading many to believe that his policies couldn't last longer than Steve Irwin in a tank full of stingrays.
However, Mussolini used policies that would benefit and please industrialists and nationalists. For example, Mussolini appointed a professor of economics to reassure industrialists that the government would reduce interference, which also helped fight inflation. Initially, these policies worked extremely well, as Italy's heavy industries expanded hugely.
Mussolini's policies included tax reduction, reduced state intervention in industry, taxes levied on wartime companies that made profit from government contracts were reduced or abandoned, and outlawing of socialist and Catholic trade unions by the Vidoni Palace Act of 1925.
These policies worked extremely well to begin with, as they bonded with Mussolini's aims of economic transformation and autarky, which is the economic self-sufficiency. The heavy industries that benefited from these policies helped Mussolini to gear towards a war.
However, these policies ultimately failed as Mussolini dismissed
Di Stefani, the economics professor, and increasingly interfered in business matters. As the failing lira had to be revalued, we can take from this that Mussolini's economic policies were ineffective.
Ultimately, Mussolini failed to effectively consolidate his power through the economy, as he didn't take advantage of the current economic boom and increasingly interfered with industrialist and nationalist matters, which annoyed them greatly, leading them to be less supportive of Mussolini.
Mussolini believed Italian colonies should be developed and expanded. He claimed not for the commercial benefits of Italy, but for the productivity of Italy. Foreign policy could give Italy lands for extraction of raw materials, essential for growing Italian empire. It would enhance its claims as a great power. From a fascist view today, Mussolini had claimed some success by 1940. The empire in Africa had been expanded, Albania had been seized, a pro-fascist regime had taken control in Spain, Britain and France, which accorded to Italy some respects as a great power. By 1935, Mussolini was eager to go to war. He wanted glory and now needed additional raw materials for Italian industry. Abyssinia had raw materials and was conveniently located next to Eritrea, part of the Italian Empire. Buoyed by the failure of the League of Nations to deal with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, and reports that neither France or Britain were willing to go to war in defence of Abyssinia, he began preparations for invasion.
Mussolini's attack on Abyssinia had a massive positive effect on his career in three major aspects. Internationally, he helped secure a long-term nationalist dream. He had avenged the 1896 defeat in Adowa. He consolidated Italy's power in East Africa, and he had made Italy into an imperial power, much like Britain and France. Politically, this great triumph aided in the development of the cult of the Duce. His cult personality played a major role in his consolidation of power. The war was utilised for his propaganda ventures. The war also fostered excitement back in Italy, which was productive as fascism favoured times of war. It was when it was at its strongest. Finally, economically, Mussolini's conquest developed emigration and export markets, along with the quest to find oil. So the war presented itself as Mussolini's finest hour. His popularity was at an all-time high after the victory, and the people loved him, although there were detrimental effects on Italy. The war was a drain on economic resources. The war took its toll, and by October 1936, the lira devalued by 40%. Italy only really had control of a few areas of Abyssinia, and the fascists gained themselves a reputation for brutality.